People see some crazy things every single day. This world is pretty big after all, so it only makes sense that there are things out there that are frightening and often confusing to behold. But our world is microscopic in comparison to this universe. Once we leave the planet, imagine the absurdities we might witness. Oh, the stories we could tell then. For now, though, we're stuck on this little green and blue marble with Skinwalkers, Wendigo, and other supernatural terrors that will haunt your nightmares and mine forever. Enjoy these brand new, allegedly true stories. If you have a story of your own, share it with us at darknessprevails.org/submit or darkstories.org. I personally think it's time to do another episode dedicated to werewolves and dogmen, so be sure to send those experiences to me at darknessprevails.org/submit or darkstories.org. Now, let's dive in. I'm never going binge drinking again, not at that log cabin. From MARALIO. There's nothing quite as fun as sitting at home on a cold, rainy day, listening to some scary stories. But listening to scary stories and actually experiencing something is entirely different. I was 18 years old. I'm from a small country in Europe. I lived my whole life in one of the biggest cities in my country, but I never shied away from going to the countryside to get a bit more of the countryman's life. So in the summer of 2019, me and two friends of mine, Martin and a guy that everybody called Wolf, decided to go binge drinking in a log cabin, which was located 35 miles from the nearest city. It didn't seem that far, but none of us had a driver's license at the time. So at about 7 p.m., we hopped on a train and went into the woods. From there, we had to walk about 3 miles to the glorious 2-story cabin. Inside on the ground floor, there was a kitchen and a bedroom. Upstairs on the second floor, there was a small hallway which led to another bedroom with separate beds. Me and Wolf established our presence on the second floor bedroom, and Martin settled down in the ground floor bedroom, like the little loner he was. We were prepping food and drinks, listening to music, never minding that we were located in the middle of the woods, miles from the nearest civilization. But we had lots of drinks and snacks to keep us company. What else did we need, right? About half a mile from the cabin, there was a giant pond. After a few more beers, we went over to the pond, thinking we could have a swim. But seeing the unnaturally dark water and a little forest of reeds, we decided that it wasn't worth the risk of getting rashes from the dirty water, cutting our legs on litter, or getting bitten by a venomous snake. Instead, we went back to the cabin. The evening was extraordinarily beautiful and peaceful. The red and purple sky was stunning, accompanied with the giant bonfire that we had prepared for the night of marshmallow roasting and drinking. When the night was in full bloom, we were quick to drink even more, and at about 1 a.m., we were in a deep state of drunkenness. Some more than others because Martin was already passed out in his folding chair. Wolf and I carried him to his room and put him in bed, leaving all the doors wide open. Everything outside was pitch black, and our smart selves didn't bring a flashlight. But with one friend already sleeping and us getting bored, we decided to head back to the pond and make a small campfire. As we got near to the trail that led to the woods, we began hearing twigs snapping and leaves crunching underfoot, like someone was quickly walking behind us through the trees. From the loudness, it seemed like they were only 30 feet away. We soon stopped and Wolf whispered to me, "Yo, I think there's someone over there." "Nah, can't be," I replied. "This is private property. Must be the wind or something." Being quite drunk and acting brave, I loudly shouted, "If there's someone there, put your hands up." Yeah, mature, I know, but when I said that, the sound stopped. Our intruder was gone, or they stopped, knowing that they'd been caught. Not being able to see who was there through the darkness, we got creeped out a bit and began to walk back to the cabin, talking about how funny it would be if someone actually stepped out of the woods and had their hands up. But what I heard after that made my heart sink. From the inside of our cabin, we heard an ear-piercing scream. It was Martin. We ran to the entrance of the cabin, and then we saw it. A pale, gray-skinned humanoid-like thing. It was 5 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms and webbed fingers. Its legs bent backwards and were super skinny. The face had 2 giant black eyes, and the mouth was opened, showing a row of long, pointy teeth. The creature was holding Martin's leg while he was screaming inhumanly loud. I never thought someone could scream like that. The thing had to run past us at some point to get inside that cabin. I was so scared that I wanted to wet myself. We had to somehow get past that thing and get inside. Thinking quickly, we picked the biggest pieces of firewood up and started throwing them at the creature. We obviously missed because of our drunken stupor, but luckily it did let go of Martin's leg and jumped back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. We ran to Martin. I nearly tripped, and we began to drag him inside, after which we clumsily closed all the windows and doors, locking ourselves on the second-floor bedroom, backs pressed against the door. Martin's leg was badly scratched. We poured some vodka on the wound and made a do-it-yourself bandage on his leg. For the remainder of the night, we heard scratching at the entrance door and windows. We were afraid that it would break the windows and get inside after us, but it didn't, and at one point, the scratching stopped. At that point, Wolf went to the window and checked to see if it was gone, but to his horror, it was instead staring in through the windows. It was looking for us. When the sun came up, we checked through all the windows for the creature again, but it was finally gone. We knew then we had to get out of the woods. After a couple of hours of being absolute cowards, we finally grew some bears and started running as fast as we could. The journey to the train station was the longest trek in my life. I was so afraid of seeing it again. My head was changing directions every few seconds, scanning the trees, scanning the ground, looking for any flashes of pale skin. We managed to make it home okay. I would later discover that the creature we saw that night was quite similar to the Dover demon. I still don't know why the creature did not attack Wolf and I, only Martin. Perhaps it was opportunistic and would not attack us as we were fighting back, and only attacked Martin because he was unconscious. I'm happy it all ended with nothing more than a few stitches. Something tells me that monster came from the pond, and that would explain its webbed hands. But I don't have to worry about that thing anymore, because I won't be going back to the log cabin. Romanian Creature from Rawl Brett 260. This story took place 2 years ago when I was 14 years old. My cousin and I were planning to go on a trip to a nearby forest, like we usually did in the summer. This trip was going well for a while, but 11 p.m. one night, we were standing on a cliff where the view was the best for pictures and memories. We hung around there for 2 hours, when at 1 a.m. we were making our way toward the city, and at first I was happy because the trip had been great. But a few seconds later, I was overwhelmed by the feeling that someone, or something, was watching us. I tried to ignore it. I was quite the paranoid person, and I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Another 20 minutes passed by, and suddenly my cousin stopped. He turned around and looked at me, dead in the face, and pale as a ghost, and asked me, "Did you see that?" Me being foolish, I thought he was trying to joke with me, but the look in his face was telling me that he was serious about this. My cousin is 6'7", and I had never seen him so spooked by anything before. He was shivering. We sat there in silence for a moment, until we suddenly heard a branch snapping on our right. When I moved the flashlight toward the direction that the sound was coming from, I froze. There was something standing next to one of the trees, like it was trying to hide itself from us, and the creature was half the height of that tree, maybe about 8 feet tall. Its body was slim but quite athletic, eyes big and shining orange-yellow in the reflection of the moonlight. The legs were bent backwards, while the flesh on its body seemed to be rotting and falling off of it. The most horrible thing about it was the head. It appeared more like a deer skull, but it was skinless. Nothing showing that much muscle and bone should still be alive. But there we were, looking at something that defied all logic. My cousin and I looked at each other. I was almost too scared to look back at the creature. I didn't want to see it again. But when we heard a human voice coming from the tree it was hiding behind, we were deeply disturbed.
"Come here. I want to talk to you."
I'm a bass singer, but the voice of this creature was a lot lower than mine, and it was so raspy, it was more akin to a 60-year-old smoker. We ran as quickly as we could to the exit of the forest. I was fat at the time, but the adrenaline and fear boosted me plenty. After 2 miles of running, we left the forest, fell on the ground from exhaustion, and hoped the thing wouldn't take advantage of the opportunity. After we caught our breath, we heard the most devilish scream coming from the edge of the woods. Despite the fact that the creature had a low voice, this scream was more like a cat and a woman together, screaming in unison. We got up, and despite our exhaustion, we ran and ran. Never has a journey back home been so long and painstaking. The Alien in My Backyard, from MATTHEWXX. It happened a few days ago. I was in my house on my phone, and I began to hear these odd scratching noises coming from around my house. Whenever it would happen, I would brainstorm, trying to wonder what in the world was causing that sound. Was it the air conditioning acting up somehow? Was it some small rodent walking around where it shouldn't be? Or maybe it was just my dog walking around and knocking over his bowl. I continued to focus on my phone, thinking that there was nothing to worry about. Eventually, it was time to go to bed. After falling asleep, I was awakened maybe an hour later to my mom grabbing my hand and urging me to sleep in her room. I asked why, wondering what the problem was, but she didn't answer. I followed her to her room, which is close to the backyard. I looked through the window to see something hiding behind one of our apple trees. I practically fell into my mom's bed, shivering. Just so you know, I'm 17 years old, and I've never witnessed anything like this before. I got into bed and tried to go back to sleep, my mind wandering for a while, speculating about what kind of animal that was, but I couldn't pinpoint it. Suddenly, there was this loud bang coming from down the hall. My mom jumped out of bed, then locked her bedroom door. I was even more dumbfounded now, as my mother began to drag me below the bed to hide. After making sure I was hidden, before she joined me, she walked over to the desk and dialed 911 from the phone there. She simply said that there was someone in our backyard trying to get in the house. We waited for a long time, in suspense and silence, until we heard a knock on our window. The person outside yelled in to us, "Police!" My mom got up, then walked over to the blinds, then peeked out toward the front door, as you could see it from her room. What I wasn't ready for was the loud shriek that came from my mom's mouth. She stumbled back, falling onto the bed, which I felt as I was still under it. I got out from under the bed to see if she was okay. She told me when she opened the blinds, she saw something that wasn't a person staring at her through the glass. I wish I could go into detail about it, but she didn't say much more than that. And the cops never showed up. Despite us calling and being told that they would, we were left alone the entire night. We didn't see the creature again after that, and it hasn't come back yet. But if you have any idea what kind of creature that was, let us know. Wendigo at Midnight, from Joel 444. I live in a wooded area. Passing in front of my house is a road, and just beyond that is a seemingly never-ending row of trees. I'd be lying if I didn't say those woods creeped me out, and these strange noises I often hear coming from those woods, they don't help. One night my parents were going out to eat for their anniversary, but I chose to stay home and entertain myself. What I would later realize was that staying by myself and not going would be something I'd regret. When they were gone, I did my usual, chowing down on loads of junk food, playing Fortnite, moving on to other games. Everything seemed to be going fine until I heard something outside, an extremely loud scream coming from the forest. The moment it pierced my ears, chills ran down my spine. I did my best to ignore this sound, continuing to play my games until about 5 minutes later, when the same eerie scream came again. Terrified, but also curious, I looked out the window from where the sound had protruded, and I saw something running across the tall trees in the forest ahead. I had to do a double take. What the heck was that? In any other occasion, I would have thought it was a deer, but the thing was running on 2 legs. I began watching its every move. It was a blur as it ran so fast back and forth, but when it did stop for a few seconds, I was able to get a good clear view of the thing. It looked starved, like a skeleton, and it had elk-like antlers on top of its head and eyes that reflected red in the moonlight. I have no idea what took a hold of me, but I ended up opening the window, stretching out my body and neck trying to get a better view of it. But instead, all I managed to do was drop the cup I was holding. It fell to the ground with a thud. Even from that distance, the creature must have heard, as its face shot towards me. We made eye contact with each other. Then it opened its mouth and began to scream. It was then I realized that was the same creature making those previous screeching sounds, and it didn't seem happy. I screamed too, and ran like heck to my parents' room, locking the door. I hid under their bed, hoping that the thing didn't come to our house looking for me. When my parents got home, I was so scared that I broke down into tears. It didn't help that when they opened the door, I screamed and thought that they were that thing. It's been a few years since this incident, and I've never seen anything like it again. But this definitely showed me that there are some very weird and creepy things in the woods. The Thing in My Closet, from KAROVIA. It all started one cloudy evening. My sister Kara and I were walking home from school one day. We still had a ways to go and it was getting dark fast. The streetlights weren't yet on, which was strange because they usually came on at around 7 and it was already 7:30. Before long, we began to hear what sounded like footsteps behind us. I turned on my heel in a split second, only to realize that there was no one there. I scanned my surroundings and then looked back at Kara. Together, we then hurried home, and by then it was already completely dark out. Our parents had not made it home yet, which worried us because they were always there before us. Not to mention, when we made it to the house, the door was unlocked. Upon entering our home, we began to hear a sound emanating from the room furthest away from the front door. Something was definitely wrong, and I was beginning to quiver with fear. We both decided that the best thing to do at the moment was to call our parents. I picked up our landline and dialed our mother's number, but it went straight to voicemail. We tried our dad next, but it also went straight to voicemail. I called a few more times and eventually gave up. They weren't answering, for whatever reason. The sound was getting louder, and it was obvious now that it was coming from our parents' bedroom. The sound was similar to a growl, slowly going louder. Cautiously, we approached our parents' bedroom. When we tried the door, it was locked. Kara quickly went over to the cabinet to find the spare key, which worked on all the doors in the house. She tossed it to me, and I opened the door to find nothing. I scoured the room, and I found it empty. I stopped and focused on the growling sound, and realized it was coming from the closet. The doors were open, and from within the closet, I could see a shadow, a tall, all too thin silhouette. I froze, petrified. I could not take my eyes off of it. And then it began to exit the closet, coming towards me. When its skin entered the light beam from the hallway of the open door to my parents' room, I could see that its skin was pale, nearly perfectly white, and its eyes were more like pitch black little beads, all a part of a large, abnormal head. I unfroze from my paralyzed state and ran as fast as I could out of the room. I ran as far as I could out of the house, into one of my friends' places nearby. To my surprise, Kara answered the door. She had had the same idea. When I went inside, I asked her why she had taken off without me. She said that she called and yelled my name dozens of times, but I never answered. But I don't remember that, and there certainly wasn't enough time for her to call my name that many times. And why didn't I hear her? Heaven only knows what was going on that night. I have no idea what we encountered, and I'm afraid that someday it'll happen again. And what happens when I'm too scared to run? What is that thing going to do to me? It took my child. From Country, 1989. I was told this story when driving through Rochester, Minnesota. It scared me to the bone. I'll be telling this from the other driver's point of view. It was a fall morning. My daughter and I were getting ready to head out to repair some fence lines. My daughter's name is Rose, and she loves the outdoors just as much as me. She was almost 5 at the time. So we both geared up, started heading out on the side-by-side. Then we made it to the damaged fence. We began to work on it. A few hours went by pretty quick. All of a sudden, the woods next to us at one point went completely quiet. It was such a quick and sudden change that it immediately stole my attention, and I looked towards the trees. And then I was hit by an awful stench. I assumed that something had died upwind of us. I constantly kept looking towards Rose, making sure she was okay. It was getting late, and I was hating that smell, so I figured it was time to start packing up to call it a day. I proceeded to walk toward the ATV, and the smell got thicker over here, like I was close to what was making that smell. And then it happened. Something absolutely huge and covered in hair hit me so hard that my breath was taken away, and I lay there flattened on the ground, basically. I coughed and tried to pick myself up. I looked in the direction of my attacker, and all I saw was thick fur. One white eye and one red eye. I must have hit my head because my vision was beginning to blur, and before I knew it, I'd blacked out completely. When I came to, it was dark, and I immediately thought of Rose. I immediately screamed her name, desperate to make sure she's okay. I picked myself up, my legs like jelly. The first thing I saw was that the ATV was torn apart, but I kept calling for Rose. To the left, to the right, ahead of me, behind me, to nowhere in particular. I called out her name 100 times. When I had to catch my breath, the silence gave way to light crying in the distance. That had to be her. I focused my attention on that direction, and I began to head that way, all the while shouting for Rose. I soon found myself at a massive brush pile. "Rose, are you there?" I stumble my way into the gap of the brush pile, and there I see her. My daughter, but she's all tied up with little straps of bark, the flexible stuff underneath the hard stuff. I cut the bark off of her, and I began to run with her in my hands. I did not stop until I got back to the farmhouse. I couldn't believe what had happened, and I was crying, realizing that I almost lost my little girl. After that experience, I took my daughter up to Manchester, sold the house and all, not risking that thing coming back. I did not feel safe with that on my land, whatever it was. If I had anything to say about this experience, it would be to watch your children, because it's not just people who want them, but sometimes there are things in the woods. Gray Eyes from JACKDENVER. I encountered this strange creature 2 years ago. I was with my dad at Jumonville in Pennsylvania. It was a cold winter. Despite the cold, my dad and I loved hiking there. However, my mom told us to avoid it, to wait until the weather was better. But we didn't listen. On the trip up to the mountain, where the hiking spot was, there was a strange feeling in my gut telling me to bring something to protect myself, or to just change my mind about going. I wasn't sure why I was feeling like that, so I ignored it. When we made it to our destination, the crisp winter air blew into my face, which was refreshing most of the time, but that day it stung. And right from the get-go, we saw a blood trail leading into the forest. There were tracks too, and they were pretty darn big. My dad was a Boy Scout and knew a lot of snake species and animal tracks. He told me to check for indents in the snow above the tracks. There were some. I asked him why, and he said it was to make sure the animal did or didn't have claws. In his own opinion, he said the tracks were similar to a fox or a bear, and he said not to worry about it, but that's the opposite of what I did. We started down the snow-covered trail ourselves. After a good hour on the trail, we saw a fox, a dead one, and oddly enough, all of its entrails were removed. It was pretty grotesque and something that I did not expect. My dad said that's probably where the blood came from, and that the tracks we saw were probably a bear then. But he was wrong about that, because what we saw next, forming a howl out of its muzzle, was no bear, and it wasn't exactly a wolf. It just burst out of the bushes and stood still for a moment, staring at us. A creature like a large wolf, but different. Its eyes were gray, and it was at least 12 feet long. I'm saying this thing was huge. My dad grabbed me by the hand, and instead of running, we just backed up slowly. Backed up until we made it back to our car. The creature, which I've never been able to find out what it was, left us alone, and we luckily weren't attacked. But I was left entirely confused. What kind of creature lives in the cold, hunts foxes, has gray eyes, and is 12 feet long? That thing is definitely some kind of cryptid. Strange wolf-like creatures, monsters that invade your home and take your children, animals that mimic voices to lure you closer. Take these stories as a warning. There are things out there that you don't want to mess with, and if they choose to mess with you, pray they make it quick. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own and you want me to narrate it to share it with the world, send it to us at darknessprevails.org/submit or darkstories.org. At the moment, I'd really love to hear some werewolf and dogman sightings. If you want to support the show, there are some links in the description that lead to my Patreon or to my merch store, both of which help a lot. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video, titled, "My Worst Nightmare Lived in the Barn. 6 True Horror Stories." Worst Nightmare says, "Like heck I've ever lived in your barn." Well, would you like to? I cleaned it out recently. There's only like 24 black widows, but they give the cutest little kisses. All of a sudden, I'm not feeling too good. Shah Alam says, "I love these stories so much. I think I'm turning into a Skinwalker." Well, look at the signs. You may be a Skinwalker if you walk around every day and you have skin. Oh crap. Zach Miner says, "The only nightmare living in my barn is my creepy Uncle Steve." What is it with uncles? I mean, if your brother has a kid and you turn into an uncle, do you also become creepy? Or is it dependent on your first name? Creepy Uncle Darkness. Oh no. Dagan Ward says, "Your barn exists. Your worst nightmare. It's free real estate." Thanks for the lol, my friend. Thanks for the lol. So Speaks Galactus asks, "What's your favorite book?" When I was younger, I liked that series called Warriors, about the cats in the woods. It actually made me cry a few times. I was a sensitive child. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, more scary stories are on the way soon, so stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're cool people. Remember, stay safe out there, and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.